I went and saw Public Enemies yesterday, and I'm not going to beat around the bush on this. I'm going to cut to the chase. Let me just say that Public Enemies is a severely flawed film. Severely. And by that I don't mean that there are a few scenes that were just not done very well and wrecked the plot or messed with the pace. In fact, the cinematography is amazing. It's the camera work and the actors, it's all very impressive. But you see what has been put together, what has been created is essentially a bunch of amazing cinematography wrapped around a terrible story. In fact, if you have ever seen a movie in your life, there is probably nothing in Public Enemies that will surprise you. I mean, nothing. There are a few key scenes in the film, at least a couple that I can think of, that made me go, wow, I'm glad I got to see these scenes. I'm not so glad I had to sit through this entire film, but I'm glad I got to see these scenes because these were really cool and well structured. But for the most part, you're not going to find very much of that, and the plot itself is just very bare. Very, very bare, actually. I mean, while there's conflict, there's very little twists. There's very few twists. That is, at least, not ones that you couldn't see coming from about, 10 miles away. These aspects of the film's plot could perhaps be redeemed by the action, only there isn't much of it, despite the way the trailer has depicted the film. So you see, while there is action, because it's not an action film, the plot doesn't build toward the action. So when the action comes, it's actually rather generic and not all that entertaining. This isn't because it's not well choreographed, but rather because it just doesn't always fit well in the context of the characters and the plot. In addition, with the exception of John Dillinger's character and the characters of a few other key scenes, the characters of this story are very one-dimensional, and as a result, they're not very fun to watch interact with each other and do stuff. Honestly, all these filmic flaws aside, I think the biggest problem that Public Enemies has is an almost utter lack of a controlling idea. See, films and stories in general aren't just about just a series of events. They're about a plot in which those series of events are placed together in a very specific form in order to portray some kind of message or meaning. Now, if you were to look at the third act of Public Enemies, I guess you could come to the conclusion that, well, the controlling idea is that crime doesn't pay. But even if, let's suppose, that crime doesn't pay is not the most cliched controlling idea ever. Let's suppose that. These themes do not resound throughout the entire plot. It's very incoherent and convoluted of a plot not to have a resounding theme that ties the entire story together, even if it's based on a true story. To break it down for you, stories are development to the end of revelation, but in this case, as you can see, Johnny Depp's character, John Dillinger, at the beginning of the film, he is a gangster. At the end of the film, he is a gangster. What does he learn about being a gangster along the way? Nothing. Christian Bale's character, Purvis. At the beginning, he is a cop. At the end, he is a cop. What does he learn along the way? Not really anything. The whole time, he's from beginning to end, he's pretty much he's the good cop trying to get the bad gangster. When the film ends, what do we learn? What do we learn from observing the behavior of these characters? What happened that is supposed to mean anything, convey any sort of meaning? What makes this story different? Mind you, Public Enemies is not a particularly bad movie, but it's not a very good one either, mainly because it is so fundamentally flawed in so many areas. Having said this, I guess I'm going to have to give it probably a 5 out of 10. See it if you like slow, episodic, and atmospheric films like No Country for Old Men and Appaloosa, but just know that it's not nearly as good. In fact, it is oftentimes unwatchable.